In the aftermath of the German capitulation during World War II, the concentration camp guards, wardens, and commanders found themselves in a desperate situation. With the war coming to an end, they sought to evade justice, knowing full well the atrocities they had committed. Many attempted to escape, change their identities, or do anything to avoid facing trial for their crimes against humanity. However, their efforts were largely in vain, as only a small number managed to evade capture. One of the most notorious concentration camps, Dachau, left an indelible mark on the Allied forces who liberated it. The evidence of Nazi cruelty was overwhelming. As the American troops arrived, they were met not with resistance but with a macabre greeting from the camp guards, who seemed oblivious to the horrors they had inflicted. The grounds were littered with hundreds of corpses, some half-burned, others showing clear signs of decomposition. The surviving prisoners, reduced to living skeletons, bore witness to the inhuman conditions they had endured. It is no wonder that the American soldiers, confronted with such a grotesque scene, lost their composure. This event, which would later be known as the Dachau massacre, began with a tragic irony. The camp commandant, SS Untersturmführer Heinrich Wicker, approached the Americans with the intention of discussing surrender terms. Little did he know that his fate was already sealed. An American soldier, driven by rage and a sense of justice, shot Wicker in the eye, sending a powerful message to the surviving prisoners. This act served as a catalyst, igniting a furious response from the prisoners who had suffered under the guards' tyranny. The prisoners, some armed with their bare hands and others with whatever tools they could find, attacked the guards with relentless fury. The American officers, understanding the prisoners' desire for revenge, turned a blind eye, and many soldiers even secretly provided weapons to aid in the prisoners' quest for justice. Approximately 70 SS guards were led towards the coal yard, and their journey was marked by violence. Several guards were killed along the way, and as soon as the American officer, Colonel Sparks, stepped aside, the machine gunner in the yard opened fire, cutting down 17 lives in an instant. The remaining guards, sensing their impending doom, were met with a brutal reception from the former prisoners. Armed with shovels and whatever objects they could find, the prisoners took their revenge. The American soldiers, while largely pretending not to notice, allowed the prisoners to exact their justice. Around 40 SS men met their end at the hands of the vengeful prisoners. Notably, the senior officers had already fled the camp, anticipating the potential consequences of their actions. For a day, Dachau became a symbol of retribution for the suffering and torture endured by the prisoners. Another 60 or so SS members were then executed by the Americans at the wall. A haunting photograph survives, capturing the moment when soldiers and a lieutenant conducted a firing squad. 4 living Nazis, standing at the wall, followed their fallen comrades, meeting the same brutal fate. The American soldiers, after witnessing the extent of the Nazis' atrocities, made a conscious decision to deliver a taste of their own medicine: death. Even the wounded SS members, dragged out of the nearby hospital, were not spared, as they too were shot without mercy. According to various accounts, approximately 346 Nazis, including Hungarians, were executed during this period. The wounded Nazis, lying on the ground, received no medical attention from the Americans. Both the soldiers and the prisoners stood by, watching the agonizing deaths of the executioners without a hint of pity. In total, around 560 people, including the wounded hospital staff and SS members, were executed in a display of raw justice. When certain historians later attempted to downplay the scale of the executions, claiming that no more than 50 SS men were executed, Lieutenant Buchner, a leader of the mass executions, posed a simple question: where had the entire garrison of the Dachau concentration camp disappeared to? The first night after Dachau's liberation saw another wave of violence. The prisoners turned their wrath upon those who had collaborated with the administration, known as Kapo. These collaborators were brutally killed, some strangled, others had their heads crushed, and some were hanged. Approximately 300 prisoners became victims of the vengeful actions on that fateful night. The guards and wardens of the Ordruf concentration camp were not as fortunate, as they did not live long enough to encounter the U.S. Army's 4th Tank Division. Most of the prisoners had already been sent on a deadly march on April 2, 1945, with only a few remaining to exact their revenge on the demoralized camp staff, who were overwhelmed by the rapid advance of the Allies. When General Patton and photojournalists arrived a week later, they documented the lynchings of prisoners against their executioners. Some guards met their end by captured weapons, while others were dismembered, their heads crushed, and their bones broken. The Buchenwald concentration camp, too, witnessed its own brand of justice. It was liberated by a prisoner uprising led by Soviet POW soldiers and officers. Some guards and wardens were killed during the initial revolt, but the survivors faced an even more brutal fate. As troops arrived at Buchenwald, the prisoners took matters into their own hands, deciding the fate of all the camp's punishers. Many were beaten, thrown into punishment cells, and forced to stand on their knees, enduring further torture. Some were trampled and torn apart by the furious crowd, driven by years of suffering. The quickest death came from hanging, considered the most humane method, but most were simply beaten to death. Neither the rebellion leaders nor the arriving U.S. troops showed any sympathy for the executioners of one of history's most brutal concentration camps. The Bergen-Belsen concentration camp was liberated by Anglo-Canadian troops who took a unique approach to dealing with the detained guards. Approximately 80 guards were involved in the grim task of burying the bodies of the dead and tortured prisoners. Under guard, the former executioners carried the corpses to the ditches, spreading them out and covering them with earth when the ditches were full. The SS guards were deliberately denied the use of gloves or respiratory protection during this process, and as a result, about 20 former guards contracted typhus from the infected corpses, leading to their deaths within a few days of captivity. While there is little comprehensive documentary evidence of the massacre of the camp staff, fragmentary information suggests that the prisoners seized every opportunity to brutally punish those responsible for their suffering and deaths. The executions were carried out with relentless cruelty, devoid of any mercy or regard for universal human laws. One can only imagine the psychological toll on those who had witnessed death's gala on a daily basis for years. Survivors' diaries provide haunting accounts of the guards' fates, mirroring the horrors they had inflicted. Some guards were burned alive, others were torn apart, and many met their end through stoning or brutal beatings on torture machines. The only execution method not inflicted on the guards was being hunted to death by dogs. Even the guard dogs themselves were not spared, as the prisoners and troops mercilessly beat them. The fate of the Pilsdentstau concentration camp guards in western Poland took an unexpected turn, as it was decided in the office of none other than Joseph Stalin. Konstantin Rokossovsky, commander of the First Belarusian Front, reported to Stalin about the impending seizure of the camp, which held a significant number of Soviet citizens among its prisoners. After approving the capture plan, the front commander sought Stalin's guidance on the guards' fate. The issue was not merely a military one, but had political ramifications. With the prisoners also comprising European citizens, a demonstrative trial for the punishers was a possibility. The following dialogue between Rokossovsky and Stalin captures the tension of the moment. Rokossovsky: "Comrade Stalin, what should be done with the concentration camp guards?" Stalin: "I don't understand you, Comrade Rokossovsky." "Deal with whom?" Rokossovsky: "With the concentration camp guards, Comrade Stalin, those who will be taken prisoner by our troops during the assault." Stalin: "You're not thinking clearly, Comrade Rokossovsky. What prisoners are you referring to? After the liberation of Pilsdentstau, not a single guard, warden, or other staff member survived. Their fates were sealed, and justice, in the eyes of many, had been served. The stories of Dachau, Ordruf, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, and Pilsdentstau stand as a stark reminder of the horrors inflicted during World War II and the complex dynamics of justice and revenge that emerged in its aftermath.